So have you ever read an ancient text, maybe a proverb or a piece of wisdom literature, and immediately thought to yourself, wait a minute, that does not line up with the real world at all? Well, today we're tackling a really fascinating mystery in this explainer. We're going to dive deep into the true meaning of Psalm 37:25 and ask a pretty heavy question. Does God actually guarantee a pain-free life?
Just listen to this bold, unyielding statement written by the ancient psalmist. I have been young and now am old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken or his children begging for bread. I mean, think about how absolute that sounds. He's literally looking back over his entire lifetime and making this sweeping, ironclad declaration about poverty, provision, and the righteous.
And that brings us right to the core mystery we're looking at today. Is this ancient verse a literal, ironclad guarantee? Or, frankly, is it completely out of touch with reality? Because let's be totally honest with ourselves. We all know incredibly good, righteous people who faced absolutely devastating hardships, financial ruin, and intense suffering. So how in the world do we reconcile this seemingly overly optimistic verse with the very real-world suffering of good people?
Section 1. The Dilemma of Psalm 37. Understanding Context.
You see, to really crack this mystery, we can't just isolate one sentence. We have to look at the turbulent reality the writer was actually dealing with when he put pen to parchment. When we zoom out and look at the larger context of this chapter, we see something completely different from a carefree, easy life. Take Psalm 37, verse 7, which tells the reader to be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Now, why on earth do they need to wait patiently? Well, it's because the writer is actually surrounded by wicked people who are prospering, while the righteous are facing severe trials. The whole chapter is actually this profound encouragement for folks going through massive trouble, reminding them to wait for God to deliver them.
It's super easy to fall into a dangerous, literal misreading here. You know, the idea that if you're righteous, you basically get a VIP pass that exempts you from poverty and hardship. But the actual meaning drawn from the text is very different. The promise isn't that bad things won't happen. Rather, it's that when those bad things do happen, God won't abandon the righteous to just fend for themselves.
And this is brilliantly illustrated when we cross-reference this idea with other historical scriptures. Look at Deuteronomy 31:8, Hebrews 13:5, and even the verse right before our mystery text, Psalm 37:24. They all confirm a totally vital theological point. God doesn't promise to prevent trouble, but he promises never to leave the righteous abandoned inside of it. Even when they stumble, they aren't cast headlong.
Section 2. Are we exempt? Pain and the righteous.
So if the promise is presence rather than prevention, let's keep digging to see if there's any evidence that God actually exempts believers from pain. Look at this foundational quote from Jesus in Matthew 5:45. He states clearly that God causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. I mean, this completely shatters the idea of a protective bubble. The biblical worldview openly acknowledges that the elements of life, both the bright, warm sun and the harsh, freezing rain, fall on absolutely everyone, completely regardless of their personal righteousness. In fact, we can rapidly build a solid case that suffering is a deeply documented part of the righteous experience. Just consider some of these heavy hitters. You've got Job, who famously lost everything he had despite being described as blameless. The prophet Isaiah. The Apostle Paul, who literally wrote about enduring tremendous hardships, being crushed under pressure, and battling a thorn in the flesh. These guys were absolute pillars of righteousness, and they suffered deeply. So an exemption from pain is definitely not what Psalm 37:25 is claiming.
Section 3. A testimony of faith. Personal observation.
Okay, so if it's not a universal guarantee against suffering, then we need to uncover what Psalm 37:25 actually is to resolve our dilemma. And the crucial point here is that it's a testimony. The verse isn't some theological textbook drafting a universal, legally binding contract against suffering. No, the psalmist is sharing a deeply personal observation of God's unwavering support over a lifetime. He's basically saying, hey, in all my years, looking back on my specific journey, this is what I've seen of God's steadfast love. It's an expression of personal hope and assurance. And you know, because it's a personal testimony, we really have to approach this verse with humility. I know that for many of you watching right now, it can be incredibly hard to fathom God's ways, especially when your own lived experiences, maybe your financial struggles or your personal losses, just don't seem to immediately align with the psalmist's positive observation. Our human understanding of how God works in the grand scheme of things is limited. It's incomplete, and honestly, it is totally okay to admit that. Section 4. Applying the verse. For our lives today.
So how do we take this ancient testimony and actually use it? Well, let's shift the focus directly to you, because this text really does matter today. Even without a guarantee of an easy, pain-free life, believers can hold on to God's unchanging hand. Amidst the turbulent waves of life, God promises to provide, care, and ultimately work all things for good, a concept perfectly echoed in Romans 8:28. The psalmist's words are meant to be an anchor for us. When the storm hits, you remember the testimony of those who survived it, knowing that God was right there with them in the boat.
So how do we actively respond to this? We can pull 3 really practical steps right from the source material. Step 1, approach your circumstances with humility, acknowledging that, hey, we don't always see the whole picture. Step 2, deepen your trust, leaning on His character rather than just looking for immediate comfort. And step 3, seek righteousness and align with His will. This draws on principles from Matthew 6:33 and Romans 12:2, focusing on doing the right thing regardless of the immediate reward.
And when we align ourselves this way, we can fully trust a core truth. God's providential care means our deepest, most essential needs are always met through Him. Like Philippians 4:19 reminds us, God will supply all our needs. Now notice it says needs, right? Not wants or preferences for an easy life. In Him, for the ultimate good of our souls, we have absolutely everything that we truly need to endure the journey.
Which leaves us with a final, absolutely vital question for you to reflect on as we wrap up this explainer. Will you let the turbulent, unpredictable waves of life dictate your faith? Or will you, just like the ancient psalmist, wait patiently through the storm and build your very own testimony of trust? The choice is entirely yours. Keep learning, keep seeking, and I'll see you next time.